मसाले तो बहुत हैं, पर प्रकृति की गोद से खास चुने मसाले जिनकी ताजगी, खुशबू और स्वाद रहे बरकरार, ऐसे उम्दा मसाले बनाते हैं सिर्फ कैच। कैच का कोई मैच नहीं, 100%।
Next, we have a book reading session by authors Sia Gupta, Shruta Babasu, and Richa Chatrodia, who will be reading some interesting excerpts from their books, The Mahabharata in Rhyme, Thakur Marjuli, and It's Also About Minor. The three will also be in conversation with Dr. Roshan Radhakrishnan, an anesthesiologist, blogger, and short story writer.
Welcome to the Times Literature Festival 2021. I'm joined today by a couple of amazing authors. 13-year-old Sia. Okay, Sia, you wrote your first book at the age of 8. At the age of 9, you had already written the Tales and Rhyme series, which reinterpreted popular stories including Aladdin, Cinderella, Snow White, Seven Dwarfs and Beauty and the Beast. All of this in the form of poetry. And yet in your latest book, you took an even bigger challenge. You chose the complex tale of the Mahabharata in English rhyme. All this you had completed by the age of 10. Am I right?
Yeah.
That's absolutely amazing. I can't even begin to imagine that.
Thank you.
Sia, I'd love to hear a bit more about your book, the new one, Mahabharata. Could you read us a few verses from that book now?
Yeah, of course. So this is my latest book, The Mahabharata in Rhyme. I'll be reading an excerpt where Krishna goes as a messenger of peace to Hastinapur to negotiate on the behalf of the Pandavas. It was agreed that Krishna, as a messenger of peace, would go. We gave Duryodhan every opportunity the world should know. When the elders heard that Krishna himself would arrive, they told Duryodhan not to offend him if he wanted to stay alive. Duryodhan tried to welcome Krishna and even offered him food, but Krishna declined his invitation politely, without sounding rude. At this, Duryodhan was again filled with rage. How can that cowherd have such courage? Just then, Bhishma and Dronacharya came. To convince Duryodhan was their only aim. Bhishma said, "You must agree to whatever Krishna shall say. For each and every word of his will be right in every way." "I'll try," said Duryodhan, but he was being fake. Everything from the Pandavas he wanted to take. When Krishna came to express his thought, many lessons to the people that day he taught. "I speak only for dharma and all that is right. Listen to me carefully to avoid any fight. The Pandavas don't want Hastinapur, the whole state. They want peace and have asked me to negotiate. Just give the Pandavas their Indraprasth back, but do not think the power to fight they lack. Just give them Indraprasth, which is only half the state. If you disagree, no one can protect you from your fate." "Never," Duryodhan then firmly replied. Even though he'd expected this, Krishna sighed. "Then just give the Pandavas 5 villages to stay." An enraged Duryodhan was in no mood to obey. "I will not give the Pandavas a needle point of land. Foolish coward, it is all mine, don't you understand?" said Duryodhan, which led to Krishna's temper being lost. Duryodhan would now have to pay a very heavy cost. "Duryodhan, you are on a path of self-destruction. I gave you one last chance, but you ignored my instruction. Now on your brother's corpses you will weep. Be it day or night, you will never sleep. You have made wrong decisions and you will fail. Your poor mother on your corpses will sit and wail. How dare you speak of my mother, you lowly coward?" Duryodhan yelled, "Enough of your nonsense, I have heard. If you say another word, I vow and I swear, I will order you captured right then and there." "Ha ha, Duryodhan," Krishna laughed. "Why don't you try? If you want to capture me, first try to bind the sky." "Guards, capture this cowherd," Duryodhan demanded. Everyone was shocked at what Duryodhana had commanded. Hearing this, the Sudarshan came into Krishna's right hand. The aura of Krishna the court would now see and truly understand. A blinding light appeared, and only the true hearted ones could see. Krishna in his actual form of Lord Vishnu, the one and only. Krishna grew bigger and bigger and finally said, I am the universe and the universe is me. Duryodhan, you are blinded by power and have been fooled. Hastinapur, happily, you could have forever ruled. Now there will be a war and you will die. He left the assembly disappointed, though he did try.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah,
I mean,
Thank you. Now, I'll read another excerpt where
Yeah.
Bhishma is killed by Arjun and Bhishma is finally put on his deathbed, rather.
okay.
The next morning, Bhishma went for a walk. When he saw Ganga, his mother, he stopped to talk. He asked her, Why are you watering this piece of land? She replied, My son, you know everything and understand. This spot will be your final resting place. Ah, said Bhishma with a smile on his face. I have been wondering what my life has been worth. Ganga replied, You have only lived for others since birth. Bhishma said, I have repaid all my debts except one. Amba's debt will be paid when this day is done. This 10th day of war no one would ever forget. Bhishma would be on his deathbed by sunset. Shikandi strode on Arjun's chariot that day. They deliberately came in Bhishma's way. Bhishma recognized Amba and put down his mighty bow. He knew at once that it was time to finally go. As Arjun shot his arrows, his tears he could not hold. Bhishma was now relieved as he was tired and old.
Okay.
Arjun
glad
shot
to
hundreds
hear
of
this.
arrows until Bhishma finally fell. Despite all this pain and agony, he bravely smiled as well. All the great warriors came in front of him, and all of them were blessed. The greatest warrior was on his deathbed, but not at all depressed. Arjun could not control himself. His face was drenched in tears. Bhishma blessed and thanked him for relieving him after all these years. Devavrat renamed Bhishma from the age of 16. Was the most accomplished warrior the world had ever seen. Now resting on a bed of arrows, waiting for the end of his days. That piece of land was blessed as on it the greatest warrior lay. Krishna, Lord Vishnu himself, went up to Bhishma to pay his respect. That Bhishma lay on his deathbed was difficult to accept. This war had caused its biggest casualty with this act of violence. Hastinapur would never be the same without Bhishma's great presence.
Excellent.
yeah, seriously.
I love how you focus also on Bhishma. You know, it's an amazing character in the Mahabharata.
He's the character where everything started. He's the main reason the war
Exactly.
happened.
Exactly. Okay, I have to ask you. You started off from much shorter fairy tales, and then you've risen up to taking the Mahabharata, which is a huge leap. And you've done such a beautiful job with that also, as we can hear right now. How difficult was it for you to start and go up to this level, to take up such a huge challenge?
First of all, I decided only to write the Mahabharata because I realized this epic tale has been written in poetry in Sanskrit originally, and then over the years it's been written in Hindi in poetry, but never in English. So I decided on myself to take up this great topic because of that only. And then it was tough. The fairy tales took on an average of 3 months, while this took a year, even though it might have been because I had schoolwork and extracurriculars to balance. But yes, while it was daunting, I really enjoyed reading this and I really enjoyed writing this. I read many versions and did a lot of research to write this. And honestly, I really love this story, which was one of the great factors. in fact, why
Absolutely
I wrote it.
brilliant.
Yeah.
I believe your first book, Magical Work of Poems, was published when you were just in class 3. Am I right? Can you tell me the story behind that?
I had to actually write a poem for school. So I wrote a poem called Rainy Day. That's when I actually got interested in poetry and writing. So after that, I started writing more poems. And then when my mother found out, she had them self-published into this. Magical World of Poems, which is also available on Amazon and Kindle.
Okay, that's amazing. I mean, I don't know if you realize it, but you're an inspiration to young boys and girls, not only of your age, but also old folk like me. So, what advice would you give to those of us who want to write as beautifully as you do?
First of all, I'm so happy that you think I write beautifully.
No, you do. There is no doubt about that. You don't have to worry.
And I would say you should read a lot, first of all. I like to think that reading is like breathing in and writing is like breathing out. They're part of the same process. And honestly, with the amount I read, reading is not a hobby for me anymore. Reading is something that I have to do every day. It's a part of my life. And it really helps to read, to get new vocabulary, to get new stories, to new ideas, new thought systems. So that would be my greatest advice.
Okay. Okay, this is a question I guess every child has been asked this year, so I'm afraid I have to ask you as well. Do you miss going to school?
Yes, I miss going to school so much. I mean, I'm trying to take this whole thing as a positive experience, as a new experience staying at home. But now it's been almost 1.5 years, but I've not been to school. So now I'm really hoping to go to school soon, and I really miss going.
Okay. I look forward to more of your magical versus Sia in the years to come. I'm going to take a break from you now and head over to Richa for a while. Richa has extensive journalistic experience and is currently the editor of special reports with the Times of India and Mumbai. In her career, she has written on social, cultural, and financial issues. We're going to talk to her about her debut novel. It's also about Maina.
So
I'm fine.
before I
Continue, please.
begin my reading, I just like to say a few lines to illustrate what the book is about for some context. So there is this young woman, Maina, the protagonist, who moves to Mumbai from Bengaluru to join an ad agency, much against the wishes of her father, who's very overprotective. He's a helicopter parent, and his name is Gopala. Now, Gopala, on his part, begins to mentally follow his child in a new city, while she, on her part, quickly grows roots here, and she's really happy. Now, Maina files a solid anchor in Aruna, who's the owner of the flat where Gopala has put her up as a paying guest. She also finds a boyfriend in her neighbor, Rohit, who at some point ghosts her, leaving her shattered. Now, Gopala must deal with Maina's heartbreak, as well as a sudden desire to meet her runaway birth mother. So, it is a coming of age story, and there are these three central characters who come together in the locality of Lalbagh, where Aruna's flat is situated. So, just one more line on Lalbagh. It was once a vital hub in the erstwhile legendary textile built district of Mumbai. And so, this book tells two stories at one point, at one time, of the three characters on one hand, and that of the city and especially its mill areas, mill lands on the other. So, the mill lands are central to the story too.
Yeah, I know.
Now, I'll read an excerpt which focuses on her boyfriend, Rohit, Maina's boyfriend, Rohit. Uh, I'm going to look at him as Prince Charming because of our CIO who has this fairy tale experience, you know. So we'll start with Prince Charming, and I'll just read a few lines.
Sure, please.
Yeah. So this is how it starts. Hey, want to grab a coffee? He asked. It was July and 2 weeks since Rohit, a landscape architect, had seen Maina. The air was humid and tiring as it had not rained for days. It should only rain over lakes or touristy spots, Rohit would tell his friends, who'd agree and describe an overcast sky as drab and dull. But Maina looked forward to monsoon and the fresh fragrance of the earth upon its mating with the first rain. She was, after all, an expat farmer's daughter. Maina walked on with Rohit, her head tilted and eyes listless. Rohit, who had made it his mission to impress her, pointed to the trees and said, I wish there were more aromatic trees in this area. I know it is fanciful thinking, but I wish there were a few eucalyptus trees on one side for their minty scent and a line of perennial flowering plants like milkweed and oleander on the other for their beauty. Between the trees, there could be little perfumed shrubs of jasmine, gardenia, and Maria exotica. This walk would have been far more interesting with these around. Don't you agree? I like our gulmohars, said Maina distractedly. Gulmohars flower during summer, enthused Rohit. It's July and they are mostly gone. We need a lot more natural color around us. At least rain trees and mehendi look radiant in their luxurious foliage and branches, like this one above us. They make up for a lack of flowers by nesting chirpy sunbirds, parakeets, and sparrows that are nature's bark and Mozart. Look, there's a sparrow right there. Maina looked up and met Rohit's eyes on the way down. He felt faint. Rohit, what is the point that you're making here? It's only a little sparrow. Do you always talk shop? You must care a lot about your work. This was not the reaction Rohit had expected. I'm so sorry to have bored you, Maina. I guess I'm trying to make you think of me as a great romantic character, not someone who works with his sleeves and trousers rolled up, planting trees in clay loam all day. Maina laughed. What's clay loam? It's a mixture of sand, silt, and clay that is used to father a robust garden. We call it mud, said Maina. Plain mud. My father spends a lot of time with his sleeves rolled up in our garden back home in Bangalore. So I don't find the idea of anyone even rolling their entire body in mud odd. You can roll in mud as much and for as long as you wish. My blessings and my father's blessings are always with you, child. They walked down a kilometer to reach the coffee shop, filled with mostly single people peering into their laptops. There were also a few couples in various stages of coupling. The newer ones were all hands and eyes. The older ones sat a little apart, each their own person again. One pair was businesslike and transactional, the two gauging each other, perhaps for an arranged marriage or a job. Their vibe was pleasant and uncluttered by emotion. I still can't believe you agreed to come out with me, said Rohit, pulling out a chair for Maina. Maina ignored the effusiveness and said, so tell me, Rohit, why is it so important for you to hang out with me? Are you from Mumbai or from elsewhere like me? I'm very much from here. You must have had friends here all your life. You have a job, you're not ugly, yet you end up waiting for me. I find you beautiful, he said sincerely. Maina laughed at that and slapped his thigh. It's not funny, Maina. Rohit sounded crushed. Maina, Maina, what a beautiful name, Maina. I've been thinking of you a lot. Do you think I'm attractive? He asked. More attractive than me. Maina walked back with Rohit in the first flush of a freshly forged tie. The way it happens on the slopes and climbs of the rolling tea gardens of Munnar that made up some of her happiest childhood memories. She was back amongst the protective trees that give timelessness to the hills. It was as if a billion blue Neelakurinji flowers had bloomed in the high ranges after generations. It felt like coming home.
That was lovely.
Thank you.
See, one of the things I've almost immediately noticed, and I've started reading your book actually right now, is what stands out is your wonderful descriptive style of writing. You're transporting a person directly to Mumbai. You're giving us a clear image of everything, be it the smell, the sounds, the sights around the protagonist. Were there any authors growing up whose style inspired your own unique style?
Yeah, I was very inspired by Gustave Flaubert, Madame Bovary, for his literary realism, and Gabriel Garcia Marquez for his magic realism. So I took out the magic from there and just focused on the realism. And yeah, because I feel that, I mean, this is just what I believe, that an author shouldn't leave too much to a reader's imagination if they can manage it, you know. I like that extra descriptive kind of style, yeah.
Okay. This title, it's also about Maina. So far from what I've seen, it's very apt. Because
Yeah,
as much as the story is about Maina, we are also clearly seeing through the eyes of a single parent, Gopala,
Mhm.
Aruna auntie, and so
Yeah.
many more people.
Yeah.
While writing a story like this, do you have trouble keeping track of the interweaving storylines?
Not really, because I set out to write a story, as I said, about two things on the macro level about the city of Mumbai itself. So when you have three characters and then you have the mill areas, you have to bring in a lot more other characters to capture
Yes,
the flavor of the. No, so I didn't find it because I was very clear about what I wanted to do from the beginning. So there's a maid who brings in the other, the mill workers background, and then you have other people who come and go, and it's to give you a kind of a complete rounded picture about their locality and their history, their background. I guess for that I had to bring in a lot of characters, but no, interweaving was not an issue at all.
okay.
Yeah,
And the mill workers issue, that was something that you really wanted to bring out
yeah,
also.
yeah. I wanted to, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, please continue.
Yeah, so I wanted to describe the larger social context of the mill areas and their economically and socially rich history. Now, the mills were a vibrant, throbbing microcosm till the unending strike of the early 1980s, which ended the era for good. And it just broke the back of the industry for good. And on some level, changed the cityscape also because the politics changed, the real estate industry of the city changed. Everything changed when that one strike. It's been a very defining strike for the city because the textile mills were among the biggest industries that the city has had, and right in the middle of it, in the central part of the
Yes,
city. Now, the stories of mill workers left bewildered and devastated by the abrupt end to their work lives and their constant struggles. It was like a full stop before a comma, before they realized everything was over for them. They've always pained me, deeply pained me. And I wanted to write about them through fictional, because I don't think there's been any fiction on this particular
no,
space of
no.
Bombay, space in Bombay. Yeah. So there have been proper non-fictional accounts which I did read up on for background and for some sort of idea. And I actually went and met a lot of the progeny of the mill workers. And I met some politicians, I met everyone to just get an idea about what they went through and how they once again got into their own, you know, they sort of
Continue.
recovered from it.
Yeah. The experience as a journalist, did it really help in making this story?
Yes, of course, because there is a kind of a discipline that comes with it, and you go very structurally. You go about the whole thing very structurally, and putting it together. Of course, you had so many years of writing, so that's not an issue then. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Are you working on a new project currently?
Yes, I am, but it's very different from this book. It's a thriller. It's more a household kind of a thriller. So yeah,
Okay.
with very few characters, so it'll be quite a contrast from. It's also about Maina.
Okay.
Yeah.
And can I take a safe guess and assume it's also set in Mumbai?
Yes, that's set in Mumbai. Yeah, because I've been here all my life, and I
No, I
relate
mean,
to this place.
believe me, even if I didn't know or if I weren't speaking to you, reading the novel, it becomes very clear that this is a Mumbai girl at heart.
Yes, I am. I am.
Okay. Rucha, that's it, I guess, from our side. I look forward to reading so much more of your lovely prose in the years ahead. I can't wait to see what you come up with next. Have a good day, week, and year ahead. I have here with me author Sutapa Basu. So the Sutapa Basu I know is the winner of the genre of mythological fiction for author Amish Tripathi at Times of India's Write India Season 1 back in 2017. 2017, she was also nominated for the Best Debut English Novel at the Pune International Literary Festival. She is the author of best-selling novels, including Genghis Khan, and Padmavati. But we are not here to talk about that. Ma'am, can we talk about your latest work?
Thank you, Roshan, and welcome to everybody who's watching this. So, and a big thank you to the Times of India LitFest. Yes, Roshan, so this is a new genre. I have translated iconic children's literature collection. So this story, this book, the original collection is called Thakumachuli, which means grandmother's bag of tales. And here is the book, the original book.
Okay.
And this particular book is as intrinsic to Bengali literature as Grimm's tales or Hans Andersen's fairy tales are to world literature. So any Bengali, whether living in India, whether living in Bangladesh or anywhere in the world, knows about this book. Absolutely. Okay. And they've grown up, you know, their childhood flavors are absolutely diffused with the stories, the princes and the princesses and the monsters and the funny creatures, the adventures which are there in this book. Okay. So I have translated this, and this is the book that I have translated. It's called Princesses, Monsters and Magical Creatures.
That's awesome. Before we get into questions about this, I'd like to bother you a little more. Could you read us an excerpt from your latest book?
I'd love to. So I'm going to read to you something that is very interesting to all the children to whom I have introduced this book, which is about monsters. So the book is divided into 3 segments. So there's one which is called Churning the Milky Oceans, which is adventures of princes and princesses. Then there is the Land of Monsters, which is all about monsters. And there is Chatter Natter, which is about funny creatures and their adventures. So I'm reading from the Land of Monsters. And I'm reading about a particular monster who's called Kokkosh. And Kokkosh are furry creatures. They have tails. They love eating human beings and sucking on human blood. And they've got pointed teeth. And they can't see in the light. They can only see in the darkness. And they speak through their nose.
This furry teeth and eating people. This sounds like some of the friends I have actually, but carry on.
Right. Okay. So here is the Kokkosh, and there are 2 princes waiting to kill them. Okay. Now, the Kokkosh can only see in darkness. The lamplight flickering under the door of the hut blinded them completely. Douse the light! Douse the light! The gang of Kokkosh screamed shrilly. Lal Kamal shouted back, "No, I will not." The huge Kokkosh chief who was leading them growled, "Grrr, you think you are very bold? Who wakes?" The smaller Kokkosh echoed, "Who wakes? Who wakes?" Lal Kamal replied, "Neel Kamal stands behind Lal Kamal. His sharp sword is always awake. Bright lamplight wipes out the pall. Death is waiting. Make no mistake." Hearing Neel Kamal's name, the Kokkosh gang retreated a few steps. They knew Neel Kamal was a prince who was born of the Rakhosh queen. They knew demon blood throbbed in his veins and were afraid of its power. "Is Neel Kamal really in the hut? How do we know?" The Kokkosh whispered to each other. The chief gave a grin, showing a long row of pointed teeth. "We will soon know. Let me speak," the Kokkosh chief shouted. "Show us your nails." Lal Kamal took off his crown with its spiked peak. Holding the crown in his hand, he pushed out its thin, sharp spike through the crack in the door. The chief put out his hand, the spike jabbed it sharply, and he jumped back. Each small Kokkosh came forward to feel Lal Kamal's nail. When the spike stabbed their fingers, they were startled. "What a long, sharp nail! If his nails are like this, how strong this Neel Kamal must be," they told each other, stepping back from the hut. When the Kokkosh chief saw that his gang was nervous and may run away, he showed his confidence by shouting, all right, show me your drool." Other Kokkosh ran back to stand behind their chief. Lal Kamal heated some lamp oil on the blade of his sword. Then he flung the hot oil through the crack. As the drops of sizzling oil fell on the fur of the Kokkosh, they screeched with pain. Groaning, they retreated further from the hut. A foul smell of burnt fur filled the air. The chief had also retreated. Now his Kokosh gang began to murmur against him. He was losing his followers. The Kokosh chief had to think quickly. He was afraid, but he began to advance towards the hut, one step at a time. The other demons slowly followed him. They were fearful too, but they were also curious. Since there were no sounds from the Kokosh, Lal Kamal sat down and began to feel sleepy. Suddenly came a bellow from the other side of the door. If you're such a brave prince, let me see your tongue. Lal Kamal jumped up. Taking hold of Nil Kamal's sword, he pushed out its sharp blade through the crack. With both hands, the chief Kokosh grabbed it. He screamed, "And now, foolish prince, we will pull out your tongue." He ordered his followers, "Hold me by the waist and pull." The Kokosh gang held the chief tightly and pulled. The sharp sword cut through both the hands of the chief. A jet of black blood sprayed the Kokosh gang. "Oh, no! Gone! I'm gone!" shrieked the Kokosh chief. Bounding over the heads of the other Kokosh, he fled. But not for long. After a couple of hours, the Kokosh chief tiptoed back to the hut stealthily. The Kokosh gang followed him, walking on their toes too. Putting his face against the locked door, he roared, "Who waits? Who waits?" Since the Kokosh had not returned for a long while, sleep had overcome Lal Kamal. The chief's roar woke him with a start. Still half sleepy, Lal Kamal forgot his brother's warning. He replied, Lal Kamal is awake, and before another word left his lips, the door of the hut crashed down. The Kokosh gang tumbled into the hut. The chief bounced on Lal Kamal. The other Kokosh overturned the lamp. In the dark room, the Kokosh swarmed all over Lal Kamal, their pointed teeth nibbling at his skin. Unable to fight so many monsters, the prince cried out, "Brother, help me!" His cry broke Nil Kamal's slumber. He opened his eyes, and what did he see? The hut was filled with Kokosh. The ground was thick with Kokosh. The walls crawled with Kokosh, and from the roof hung Kokosh. And Lal Kamal, he could not be seen at all. So thickly were the Kokosh teeming all over him. Nil Kamal yawned and stretched lazily. Then he thundered, "Sluggish and sleepy are my limbs. Who has dared to break my dreams?" Just the sound of the Nil Kamal's voice sent a chill through the Kokosh gang. And then what do you think happened? You'll have to read the story to know more.
This is awesome. Yeah. You really should be doing audiobooks as well. All right, let's quickly go to a few questions. Okay. What were the main challenges you faced during translation?
Okay, the main challenges were, first and foremost, this book had to be made for children who were very used to audiovisual, devices and narrations. So I had to make sure, number one, the imagery, which is like beautiful in the original, had to remain intact. And yet the language had to be simple, and it should fall within the linguistic ability of the target group, which is basically 7 years and above, like 10 or 12. So I had to make sure that happened. Also, that the language had to be modern in context. We can't see this book. The original book was published in 1907.
That's more than 113 years ago.
Yes, and the stories are even older. And the original author, Dakshina Ranjan Mitra Majumdar, he retained the style. So there were a lot of words which were, which is a little old Bengali language. So but I made sure that the English that I put in was not archaic in any way. It fell within the linguistic ability. The children didn't, there were no stumbling blocks. There were no hiccups when it came to the meaning of the words. I mean, they didn't have to stop and find out what the meaning of the word was. So that was one thing, the language. Also, another problem with the language is translating Bengali into English. So both the languages are very, very expressive, very eloquent, and very evolved. Yet, their vocabulary, the linguistic nuances, the metaphors, the idioms are very different. So that translation into the target language was where I really faced a challenge.
Challenges.
So I had to really research, and find out the expressions which would really match the Bengali part, because I didn't want to lose the ambience. I did not want to lose the imagery that was very much there, And another thing I think that is very common to all Indian languages is that our languages are very melodic, and they're melodic and lyrical because of the onomatopoeia, the sound words that I use.
Okay.
So Bengali uses sound words a lot like adjectives, and adverbs.
Okay.
But English didn't have such a huge
correct
range of revibration
similar
words.
Yeah.
And children love chants. So I had to keep those chants. So what I did was sometimes I created certain words, certain sound words, which, would be meaningless without the context. Or sometimes I retained, if you remember the the reading I did, I retained some of those I, Maui and all those words,
Yes.
because they were so gave the whole picture so well. But I gave an English explanation with that. So these were some of the challenges. Another very important challenge was my intention when I was writing this is to take the regional flavor, the regional culture into a much wider space.
Okay.
So this is not there in the original, but I ensured that the settings of the books showed the geographical diversity of the region.
Okay.
So anybody who has been to Bengal or who knows about Bengal would see the Ganges flowing through its wide plains, would see the green, verdant hills of northern Bengal full of tea gardens. And they would even see the Sundarbans. So I set the stories, in those kind of geographical locations. The other thing was that I brought in few things like the blowing of the conch shell, which is very, very common to, I think, all Indian
mythology
ceremonies,
Definitely.
And it is still, it is very much
still is correct.
Yes.
It's still always a part of our culture.
Absolutely. So that conch shell, how do I show? I wanted to give the sound, and you will not believe, trying to make the sound, the onomatopoeic, sound of it, I blew so many conch shells. And then I realized that the sound is actually a very elongated om. So it goes as om. That is the sound.
I didn't know. I didn't think of that actually.
So that is how I have, written it down in my stories.
Okay.
Another thing is this rice-based patterns, which is very common to Bengal, called alpona.
Okay.
So in any auspicious occasion, pujas and all, they make this on the floor with white. So I use that alpona. I've mentioned it in the book, and also I've used that alpona pattern in the style in the illustration. So I'll just show you one illustration here. So I don't know whether you can see it. So
yeah, I can.
Yeah. So this is the kind of alpona pattern, which is very semi-realistic kind of a pattern. I forgot to show you the, my reading. You must see the kokosh you were talking about. So these are the kokosh.
Okay.
Gang. Yeah, so this is the kokosh gang.
Okay, fine.
With their tails and furs and things like that. So these were some of the challenges, yes.
Okay.
But they were also learnings.
Okay, we're running out of time a bit. So I'll quickly skip to my last question. Are you working on a new project currently? Something you could offer a preview for us?
So I have the small quirk. I usually don't talk about my work in progress,
but
what I can tell you that it is based on history, heritage, because that is very close to my heart. Also, I'm very I have become very keen to work in other genres. So I have been working in historical novels, also in the genre of thriller and mysteries, and now this translation in children's literature. So I'm planning to go into some other genre when I write this as well, because I believe that will enhance my skills as a writer.
This itself is like a huge shift from your earlier genres.
Absolutely.
And yet, because of the historical aspect, this still has a small connection nonetheless.
Absolutely. But I have been writing a lot of children's stories which have appeared in school textbooks.
You did mention that to me years ago. I remember that. Actually.
Yes.
So this is like a wonderful extension of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And very close to my heart, because I have grown up listening to these stories from my grandmother, reading them, as
Okay.
have I think all Bengalis.
Okay, it's been great catching up with you, Sutapa. Thank you for taking the time out from your busy schedule. I'll be seeing you soon. More accurately, I'll be seeing your name soon on the Indian bestsellers list again.
Thank you so much, Roshan. It was lovely talking to you and reading out also. So I hope that everybody who will hear this will also think about taking this book to their children, their grandchildren, because a lot of grandparents are contacting me and saying, oh, please, we want this book because we have read these stories and we want to take it to our grandchildren. So thank you so much, Times Fest, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you for watching today's sessions. Please join us next on Saturday between 5 to 7 p.m. to watch our upcoming sessions. We will kickstart the session with Jyotirmaya Sharma, an author and a political science professor at the Hyderabad University, who will discuss the making and unmaking of Gandhi's Ahimsa. Next, we will have author Anita Nair, who will delve into her journey as an author. The last session of the day will feature author Nikita Singh, author of the most recent What Do You See When You Look in the Mirror? Also, do not forget to talk about us on our social media handles and do use the hashtag TimesLitFest.